What is up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Not So Stupid podcast. Today's episode is another Q&A brought to you by the beautiful people on Instagram that follow me and participated in answering these questions. So once again, as always, if you want your question answered next time on the Q&A, make sure you're following me on Instagram at stupid.fit. Stupid is with two O's, always is with two O's, and I'm more than happy to answer your question next time I have this segment. I'm going to try and do one or two of these a month to make sure that everyone's always consistently getting their questions answered and has the opportunity to ask their questions. So I'm really just going to dive right into it. I got about 8 questions that we're going to go through today, and I read a couple of them before starting, but for the most part, this is all going to be improv answers. So I really like doing that more than anything. So going through it, the first one is, how did you come up with the StoopidFit logo? And I really like that question. I didn't come up with it per se. The only thing I knew I wanted with the StoopidFit logo was a stick person, because it's simple, and the idea of the whole brand is simplicity in one way or another. So having a stick person was key. The rest of it, I hired a designer for that, and after going back and forth on a couple of options and actually working with a few different designers to see what they could come up with, finally landed on this one. Felt the best, felt the most natural, really loved it. It was just one of those moments where when I saw it, I was like, this is for sure, it has to be it. There's no other way it can be anything else. So that is how I came up with it. Really appreciate the fact that you love it. I don't know if I finished reading the question the first time, but it said it's so unique. I love it. So thank you. I love that you love it. And yeah, it's been the go-to logo since then. You see it everywhere now. Going to the next question. It says, maybe too long for Q&A, but the body types, ectomorph, mesomorph, and endomorph. So there wasn't really a question tied to this. I don't know if you were trying to see what they are, if you were trying to figure out how truthful they are, what they do. Not really sure what the goal was with this question, but I'll go through what it is first in case people don't know what it is, and then share my opinion on the various parts of it. So these are called somatotypes, I believe. I've only ever read it. I've never actually said it out loud, oddly enough. So I think it's called somatotypes, and like I said, there's 3 types of somatotypes, and these are different body types, and each body type follows certain characteristics. And those body types, before I go on, are ectomorph, which is a lean and tall individual with difficulty building muscle. So thinking your average thinner tall guy, right? Endomorphs are bigger people. They have higher body fat, more susceptible to storing body fat, and they're often pear-shaped, heavier on the bottom, wider on the bottom. And then mesomorphs are muscular, well-built, high metabolism, and the muscle cells respond really well. So these are your generic athletes, stereotypical athletes, kind of rectangular frame, and just strong, firm people. Really easy time gaining muscle, don't really store fat too much, and just strong people all around. So that's the general breakdown of those 3. A few years ago, I don't even remember how long it's been now. I know when I first started working out 10 years ago, I first heard about this, and I thought it was kind of interesting. I never got too deep into it. Obviously, as I became a trainer, I heard this question more and more. I had to learn more about it to be well informed. But the idea is, with the somatotype, once you figure out your somatotype, you ideally train a certain way to reach your goals, or you eat a certain way to reach your goals. So you recognize that you have this predisposition as a somatotype. You recognize that if you're an ectomorph, you're a tall, skinny guy that has trouble building muscle, guy or girl, I should say. I think guy is a gender neutral term now, but besides the point. If you're an endomorph, you're going to be just more likely to store fat, so you're going to have a harder time losing fat or building muscle, because that's just how your body naturally goes. If you're a mesomorph, you are more muscular. If you're trying to get fat, or if you're trying to get thinner, that's going to be hard for you, because you just have highly responsive muscle cells, and you're just meant to be built and have a toned body. Now, I think when I was looking through this a few years ago, that this originally was suggested by someone in the 1940s. So this was a long time ago when this idea was first presented to people. It became really popular 10 years ago because some guy, a different guy, came up with a diet for this and said that if you're this type of guy, you need to have this type of diet. If you're an ectomorph, you need to eat this and this and this. You need high carb, low fat. If you're endomorph, you need more protein and more carbs. If you're a mesomorph, that was the idea. If depending on your body type, you need to have certain foods in proportion to reach your goals. Now, we know in science that this isn't necessarily the case. It's going to be, every person is going to have different needs, but it's not because of your body type per se. And beyond that, I feel like personally, I've gone through a couple of these body types in my lifetime. So I used to be in ectomorph early on, like 10 years ago when I was starting off. I was 6 feet tall, 140 pounds. So really skinny kid, always had trouble building muscle. Now I would consider myself more mesoformic because I'm 6 foot tall still, but now I'm 210 pounds. And I kind of stay in that range more than anything. I might go up to 215 after a higher eating day or something, but as a whole, I'm staying in this range. I build muscle much easier now, relatively speaking, and it's, that's just how my body is shaped. But it wasn't because of my somatotype that I was able to do this. Obviously now I'm 210 pounds. I started off as an ectomorph and I've built muscle throughout this entire process, roughly 50 pounds of muscle, I would say, to get to where I'm at now. Even though it was difficult, it still happened. And I would say, I don't know, I'm going on a rant right now, but what I'm trying to say is that there isn't a lot of value to how you change your diet or how you change your training depending on your body type. It's valuable. I wouldn't even put a lot of value to it, honestly. It's cool to recognize, like, oh, that's me, but then to change your entire approach from a science-based approach to a somatotype approach isn't necessarily going to help you reach your goal any faster or sooner. At the end of the day, if you want to build muscle, you need to train with intent. You need to train to failure consistently, train your muscles multiple times, each muscle group multiple times a week, have an adequate diet of protein and carbs, and walk, recover, all that kind of stuff. If you're trying to lose weight, manage your calorie intake as a whole, make sure you're eating enough protein, you're drinking water, you're sleeping, and training frequently, resistance training frequently enough to challenge your body to burn calories and maintain muscle. Like, those are constants no matter who you are. Obviously, some people have a genetic predisposition to lose fat faster or build, or just, actually lose fat faster is what I should say. Lose fat faster, maybe have more muscle development naturally, and that's cool. That happens from person to person depending, but it's not like if they wanted to change that goal, they still need to go through the same process. They can't outdo science because of their body type. They still need to follow the same procedure to build muscle, the same procedure to lose fat, the same procedure to improve their performance, whether that's running or lifting more. That's always going to stay consistent. It's more like you acknowledge that you have this body type, and that's about it at that point. After that, there's not a lot of value to it. So again, there wasn't really a question that was asked to this. It was just talking about the body types, and that is basic breakdown of the 3 body types. As a whole, I wouldn't tie a lot of value to this. It's kind of cool to just look at and see what your body type is, but there's no specific training or diet for your body type. I would always say it's a specific training and diet based on your based on what goals you're trying to achieve. It has nothing to do with the type of body that you have, but it's always going to tie down to your goals. The approach you take will always tie back to your goals, not to anything like this. There was actually another weird diet more recently in the last 3 years that I saw called the blood type diet, and depending on your blood type, it was supposed to have, I don't know, random stuff. I know I was blood type O. I'm O positive, so I just looked it up to read and see what it was about. And basically it told me that I actually don't need vegetables at all. Or not at all. I should say, like, I need way less vegetables than the average person because of my blood type being so, I forgot the actual medical term for it, but because I can donate blood to so many people, I'm able to have less vegetables because I'm so diverse and nutriently dense or something like that. I don't know. It didn't really make sense. Ask my sister about it, who's a nurse, and she knows about blood way more than I do, and she's like kind of really roasted it all together. But as a whole, as a disclaimer now, if you ever see a diet that claims that your blood type, your body type, your hair color, whatever needs a certain diet as opposed to somebody else, I wouldn't give it a lot of value, honestly. At the end of the day, there's certain principles that need to be done. Just make sure you're doing those principles and you'll be all good. So next question now, what's a secret food more people should have? I like the phrasing of secret food. So I'm gonna say, like, if I were asking this question and I said secret food, I would say like probably something that goes under the radar. Not a lot of people have it, but it would be helpful for them to have more of. That's what I would classify as a secret food. It's not in the generic greens and fruits and proteins kind of thing. So obviously you're gonna need to have and want to have those kind of foods. But one food that sticks out to me, or actually two now that I think about it, is going to be, one is chia seeds and flax seeds. So these are high omega-3 foods. They really don't get consumed enough. Omega-3s, if you listen to the supplement podcast last week, you know that omega-3s are an essential nutrient that we don't get enough of. And if you can supplement it and then get some more of it in your diet, you're only going to be helping yourself, because the benefits of them are just through the roof. They're anti-inflammatory, they help with your cardiac output, they help with fat oxidation, they help with your cognitive function. Like, there's so many things omega-3s are used for, and if you're not getting enough of it, you're really limiting the quality of your life, the quality of your recovery, the quality of your transformation, and just making sure you have more of that is helpful. So chia seeds, you could sprinkle them on foods, on salads, you can throw them into smoothies and things like that, throw them on top of yogurt, and flax seeds, same exact way. They're, again, really great to have. Just make sure that you do have them. Now, the next thing I would say is something like a kimchi. I really like kimchi. Another thing that's similar is sauerkraut. But kimchi is getting a lot more popularity now as a whole. So when you go to supermarkets, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Jewel, any of those major grocery store chains, they'll have dozens of flavors of different kimchi, which is cool because it gives you options to mix and match with your meal. But you want to have kimchi in your diet more often than you do right now, probably, because it is a fermented food and it's filled with really good bacteria for your digestive system. Anytime someone has trouble digesting foods, anytime somebody has women, if you have high symptomatic cycles, the kimchi has a lot of micronutrients and has a lot of, again, good bacteria that's going to help your digestive tract work properly and move things along. Really, it's a big contributor to help alleviate all of those symptoms. Anyone that I coach that goes through a elimination diet because of pre-existing gut condition like IBS or leaky gut or something like that, kimchi is a staple food that we're going to have, because again, it has nutrients that you're not going to really find anywhere else, because there's not a lot of fermented foods that a lot of people eat regularly, and kimchi just tastes good all around, honestly. And if it's too expensive to get at the store, it's really inexpensive to make. You can YouTube a video. I might link it in the show notes if I remember. I should make a note of that. But you could YouTube a video of how to make kimchi, and you can make like a month's worth of kimchi in like 10 minutes. It's so easy to make. You can make it taste anything you want with how you spice it, how you flavor it, and it's unbelievably helpful. And again, like, this is a secret food because not a lot of people get enough of it. Not a lot of people think of it. Not a lot of people mention it outside of like the gut health gurus, quote unquote, that like to talk about gut health. But kimchi, really underrated. Highly recommend more people consume it. And pairing that with chia seeds, flax seeds, or an omega-3 food, super helpful as a whole for your entire body. You'll feel a lot better really fast if you have those foods regularly. So now next one is recommendations for training and nutrition after getting ACL surgery. So I'll have some recommendations, but before I go further with this, I do want to say disclaimer: I'm not a physical therapist, I'm not a doctor. Before you can get cleared make sure you get clearance from a doctor, from your physical therapist, before you can train or anything like that. That's going to be really important. And likewise, before you make any nutrition adjustments, post-surgery, post-operation, any kind of surgery, make sure that, again, you consult with your doctor and get the okay on that, because they're going to know the insides of your body a lot better than I would know the insides of your body. But there are going to be some principles that you do want to focus on generally. When it comes to training, where you can't use basically an entire body part, right? You can't use your legs at all. You could do one-legged stuff, but as a whole, if you're going through your rehab, actually I should break this down in 2 phases. There's going to be immediate post-op and then post-rehab training. Now, when you go through immediate post-op, really you're limited. All you could do is upper body work, and all that upper body work needs to be seated pretty much. Now, you do want to, seated or laying down, you do want to make sure that single side work is limited, in the sense that you don't want to, you're losing a leg. You're essentially losing the hip as a whole too, because you can't use your knee or you can't use your foot to stabilize yourself. So your hip stabilizes, your glute stabilizes on that side, won't work as much. If you're doing single-sided upper body work, it'll be really hard to stabilize yourself. So make sure that you use dumbbells, you use barbells, everything's evenly loaded on both sides, and you can pretty much train upper body as regular. I would say like a push-pull alternating split is going to be ideal for you, because you can't really do legs outside of rehab that you'll be doing with a physical therapist. But after the fact, after your rehab is done and you're cleared for movement and you're cleared to get things going in the gym again, it is really helpful to incorporate a lot of single-sided activity, because you want to get your leg up to speed, and then do a lot of isometric work as well. So when you have ACL surgery, you're going to experience a lot of muscular atrophy, because you're going to be muscular atrophy, meaning your muscles are going to get smaller, and you're going to experience that because your leg hasn't moved for months. It's been stuck in a brace more than likely for a long period of time, and it hasn't moved at all. So the muscles haven't been used, they haven't needed to work this whole time. They're going to get smaller because they lost their job essentially. So you want to gain muscle in your leg again, get it back up to speed and catch up with your other leg. Focusing on a lot of single-sided work is going to be necessary. Otherwise, if you're doing like a leg press, for instance, with 2 legs, the dominant leg, the leg that didn't have an ACL tear, is going to do a lot of the work for you. So focusing on single-sided work is going to be key. Focusing on following the different movement patterns as well is going to be really important. So making sure, obviously, you're going to hit all the different muscle groups. And then when you do that, do an extra 1 to 2 sets for that side to have it progress a little faster. So if you're going to do, like, let's say single leg extensions for 3 sets of 10, do 4 sets of 10 on the left side. So just do an extra set on the ACL torn side, the side that's recovering better. That's just going to help get it up to speed faster and catch up to things, because at the moment, you're falling behind, and you're just trying to make up for lost time essentially. So doing that extra set can go a long way. Another thing you can do is when I should note, because I get this a lot actually from people that have gone through some sort of surgery, if you are doing single leg work, do not only do the non-working side. There's a lot of benefit to doing both sides individually. So even when you're doing your right side only, if you were only training your right side, you neurologically, you're helping push your injured side into recovering faster, because it's going to carry over everything you're learning, not necessarily everything, but it's going to take a lot of carryover from what you're doing and apply it to the weaker side. And this is something you'll likely experience with physical therapy as you're going through rehab from not moving at all. They'll make you do similar exercises to your working leg, but because of that. So it's not necessarily that you can only work out that leg to make it better. Working out the other leg and getting a feel for how those muscles work, going through and applying the different movement patterns to different degrees is going to help you recover your injured leg so much faster. So there's been a lot of studies done on that, and there's a lot of value in that. So if don't just focus on the injured leg, do both, and it'll still help you recover faster than just doing the one leg. And then do extra sets of that working leg, because even though that helps, you're going to get more of an effect obviously from working the injured leg. So make sure you're working that injured leg for extra 1 to 2 sets per exercise, and focusing on isometric movements. So things like wall sits, where, well, I shouldn't say, again, like, talk to your physical therapist, talk to your doctor before you do any of these, but things where you're just flexing a certain muscle and keeping it contracted for a long period of time, just to have better use of it as a whole, create a stronger mind to muscle connection as a whole, to help you go through and actually make progress once again, move comfortably once again, and be happy with how your body is working. So those would be my training things. Upper body wise, when you are injured and you can't use your leg at all, go through like an alternating push-pull split a couple times a week, and feel free to do single leg exercises with your working leg, but not at a high load, not at a high intensity, not at a high volume, just like getting through the movement patterns. That helps usually with the recovery faster. And then when it is better, when you can use your leg again, you're cleared for exercise and all of that, going to doing multiple extra sets, 1 to 2 extra sets per exercise for your left leg, and opting for unilateral work, so only single-sided work while you do leg days is going to be ideal. So that is how to work with that. Oh, and then the nutrition side of things is actually, it's going to depend on person to person overall, but as a whole, you're going to be moving less, so you don't need as many calories to survive. But at the same time, your body is going to want some nutrients to help with the recovery aspect of things. Your body is going to want some certain foods that are going to help speed up the recovery process in a way, because right now the injury that you have is creating inflammation in your body, and adding more inflammation to your body isn't going to necessarily bode well for your recovery. In fact, people that have a lot higher lifestyle stress recover from injuries much slower than people that have lower lifestyle stress, because all inflammation is taken the same in the body in a way. So what you want to do is limit pro-inflammatory foods, limit consumption of pro-inflammatory foods when you are recovering from any kind of injury. So things like dairy is generally pretty pro-inflammatory. Tomatoes and nightshades are pretty pro-inflammatory. So things like eggplants and stuff like that. Fried foods, high oil foods, those kind of things, also pro-inflammatory. Limit how much of those you're consuming in a day. Limit or eliminate, I would say, entirely, depending on how you feel about it throughout the day. And then add more anti-inflammatory foods. So anti-inflammatory foods being omega-3s, like we mentioned earlier, is one, which you can get from like tuna and salmon as well. Supplementing omega-3s. What else? Avocados are pretty anti-inflammatory. Man, I can't think of this off the top of my head. But yeah, so those are some general ones to add in, and then on top of that, making sure you just stay hydrated. So making sure you stay hydrated throughout the entire time as well is really important. So those are different food things that you would do, I would say, that would help with the recovery process. Reduce pro-inflammatory food consumption, increase anti-inflammatory food consumption, and then manage your calories appropriately. Again, you're moving a lot less. You won't need as many calories to maintain the weight that you're at. So you'll probably need to experiment for like a week or so to see what the ideal calorie number is for you, but it's probably going to be less than what you were having pre-surgery. So having fewer calories just to make up for the reduction in activity that you're going to have is a smart thing to do. Otherwise you'll be gaining weight the entire time as well. So those are good nutrition guidelines to follow. Next question. Oh, this is a good question to follow up. How to properly achieve mind-muscle connection? What type of training is its purpose for? So I feel like I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I've never actually gone in depth about it. So this is really cool. So mind-muscle connection, for those of you that don't know, aren't familiar with it, is basically being in tune with your muscles as they're being used. So what that means is when you're doing a bench press, when you're doing a dumbbell bench press, through the entire motion, you feel your chest stretching throughout the bottom and then contracting at the top. You feel the whole muscle opening and closing. And this applies to all muscles. You know, every muscle that you train in the gym is going to have a full, or is going to have a certain length that it stretches to. This is called the eccentric phase. And then a certain tightness it squeezes to. This is called the concentric phase. So an easy example actually is a bicep. This is gonna be the easiest example I can think of. So when your arm is fully extended, you are in the eccentric phase. Your bicep is the longest it could be from your shoulder to your elbow. This is the highest stretched position. And if you're holding a load, you can likely, so holding a load like a dumbbell or a cable, you can likely feel your bicep being stretched in this position. And then when you pull it in, you know, curling up, bringing your hand to your shoulder, your bicep becomes smaller. So now you can usually feel it if you have a large enough bicep that it is getting smaller. It's like it's balled up, it's contracting. And this is something you want to recognize with all the different muscles in your body. Feeling that stretch, feeling that contraction, and doing that through every rep, through every exercise that you're gonna be doing. It's easier said than done a lot of times. There's gonna be some muscles that come naturally to you for you to feel how to squeeze and feel how to stretch. Some muscles you're not gonna feel it as much while you're training. Now, is it actually beneficial and is it helpful for you? And this really depends on your goals. So I would say if your goal is fat loss, or if your goal is just to train for general health purposes, mind-muscle connection isn't a priority. It's helpful to have, it's important to be able to do it, but it's not necessarily a priority. Because when you go through the motions of an exercise, whether you feel those muscles or not, those muscles are still going to be working. So when you do a bench press, if you're doing it properly, you have the right form, depending on what your joint angles are, that's going to dictate what muscles you use. And if you have the proper joint angles, you're using the proper muscles. Pretty straightforward. And that applies for all exercises, you know, likewise with squats, with deadlifts. If you have the right joint angles, if your joint angles, your ankles, knees, and hips are in the right places for whether you squat or whether you deadlift, those muscles are going to get worked, right? Now, when it comes time to focus on hypertrophy, you're focusing on building muscle, mind-muscle connection becomes so much more important. So there was a study done by Brett Contreras, who is known as the glute guy, and he focused on lower body exercises and the activation of those muscle fibers when you think about the muscle and when you don't. And he focused on the glutes, obviously, because that's his thing. He's the glute guy. So he did I forgot what the thing is, but he's basically measuring the electric signal that goes into each muscle as you use it. And he put little pads on people's quads, people's hamstrings, people's glutes, and he had them do 4 exercises, I believe. He had them do the Bulgarian split squat, the regular barbell squat, a deadlift, and a single leg RDL. And he tested about 12 or so people, I believe, and he had them do a set where they didn't think about activating their glutes, where they weren't thinking about establishing a mind-muscle connection. They weren't focused on glute squeezing and glute stretching. They were just going through the movement and making sure they have good form. And then a set where they did focus on that, where they did focus on glute squeezing, where they did focus on glute stretching and really thinking about the glute going through the range of motion, extending and contracting properly. And what he found was there was about a 30% increase in muscle fiber recruitment for when you did think about the muscle, when you did establish that mind-muscle connection. And that bodes well for hypertrophy. That bodes well for developing those different muscle groups. That's when a mind-muscle connection is really important, and I think I would say vital to training. Is if your goal is hypertrophy, if your goal is to build muscle, you need to know how to feel your muscle. You need to know how to use your muscle and squeeze that muscle, because those contractions that you do and going through the full eccentric phase, going through the full stretching phase, are really what break down the muscle tissue enough to want to rebuild themselves and to grow. So knowing how to feel that, knowing how to use that to your advantage is key. Now, Arnold Schwarzenegger, obviously the most famous bodybuilder of all time, arguably, he was always quoted as saying whenever he was in a building phase, whenever he was in a growing phase, he would visualize his biceps growing to the point where they fill up the whole room. So that is a similar idea where if you visualize the growth, it leads to more growth. And that's where, again, this is going to be the most helpful. Now, how can you establish more of a mind-muscle connection if you have trouble with that? So again, like, those muscles are going to be working no matter what if you go through the right movements, if you go through the right joint angles. So if you don't feel your glutes while you squat, it's not like your glutes aren't working. They're still working because you need your glutes to stand up. If you didn't have glutes and they weren't working, you wouldn't be able to extend your hips. You wouldn't be able to stand up straight. But they're happening. Now you can obviously, like I said, do more, you get more out of your glutes if you focus on that mind-muscle connection. But if you're not sure, if you're new to this, if you never tried this and you don't know how to actually focus it and do it, the best way to get more and feel more and create a stronger connection is by flexing or doing isometric exercises once again. So we mentioned that for just the last question about ACL surgery, but if you are about to squat and you want to feel your glutes more, you want to activate your glutes more when you're squatting, doing frog pumps beforehand. So frog pumps are an exercise. It's like a glute bridge, but the bottoms of your feet are facing each other. So your knees are out wide and you drive your hips to the ceiling. This isolates the glutes. When you go to the top, you bring your hips to the top, pause there and squeeze. This is a good position that will contract the glutes very strongly as opposed to trying to contract them while you're standing. And you can practice in that position holding that squeeze or squeezing and unsqueezing your glutes to create a stronger connection. Now, once you do that, this is basically like priming your body into feeling your glutes better while you squat. Once you do that, you go through the squat, it becomes easier to feel your glutes while you're doing it. Again, like, your glutes are still working whether you feel them or not, but feeling them more, it really helps with hypertrophy. So that is one way to do it. Same thing with other body parts, like your chest is one that a lot of people struggle feeling, or your lats are one that people really struggle feeling. There is an exercise called palm squeezes, which is literally as it sounds. You take your palms, squeeze them as tight as you can, and you keep it at chest level. So right in front of your chest, you're gonna have your hands face each other, squeeze it as tight as you can. You should feel your chest contract in that position, and doing that between bench press sets will help you get a better mind muscle connection with your chest while you train. With the lats, there's an exercise that I found from Cody McBroom a couple years ago that I found really valuable and helped my clients get a better connection with their lats, and that's a half kneeling lat pull-in. And basically it's, you use a cable or a resistance band with this, pull the band down, elbow to your pocket, and then you crunch sideways to really contract your lat. And doing all of that, holding that crunch and then releasing back up until you feel that stretch again, really establishes a strong mind muscle connection with your lats, so that when you do your first exercise, whether that is a barbell row, whether that's a pull-up, whether that's a deadlift, whatever the case may be, you have that established and you feel it so much better. So that's how you would practice getting a stronger mind muscle connection with the different muscle groups, is flexing and contracting them in isometric positions, and just practicing that until you're able to do it without the exercise, which takes a lot of time to be able to do, especially if you're a smaller person and your goal is to build muscle. Early on, you're going to struggle with that a lot. You're going to really struggle with finding and using those muscles if you're not familiar with using them. You've never used them before to this capacity, to the degree that you want to. It's a learning process. It's a skill you achieve. And every muscle is going to be pretty hard to learn individually. Some, again, will come more naturally than others, but you just got to keep practicing. Okay. What does training to failure look like? So training to failure, for those that don't know, there's two ways to say this usually. It's either training to failure or AMRAP, which is an acronym for as many reps as possible. That's more familiar in the CrossFit space, the AMRAP that is. But basically, it is just training or doing an exercise until you cannot do another rep. So until you cannot do another rep with proper form. I should disclaimer that. So if you can rep out maybe 5 more, but if that means, or let's say you're doing squats, you can rep out maybe 5 more squats at the weight that you're doing, but if that means your knees cave in and you're leaning more on your toes than your heels, and your torso is leaning forward and it's all your lower back, those reps aren't going to help you. So you want to go as many reps as possible, or till failure, until your form breaks. And that's what training till failure looks like. Now, you didn't ask this, but when do you do that? That is, you always want to train close to failure regularly, especially if your goal is hypertrophy. So that means like 1 to 5 reps in reserve up to failure is ideal in that situation. So what that means is reps in reserve is how many reps you have left until you experience failure, until you feel that form breaking down. This is something you learn as you go on, what your body feels like when that happens. How in tune with your body will determine how well you're able to recognize this, but the more you practice and the more you put yourself in these positions, the more familiar you get with it. But you want to ideally most of the time train to close to failure, 1 to 5 reps away from actually breaking form. And if your goal is hypertrophy, focusing on that mind muscle connection and going through it all the way to that point. If you're working on a specialization phase where you want one specific body part or a couple specific body parts to grow, you can take that body part to failure more frequently throughout the week. So not every single exercise is going to go to failure. You're still going to have those main exercises that go to a couple reps in reserve. But if you want to have a burnout exercise at the end of your workout, where like if your goal is glutes, once again, you do glute bridges, bodyweight glute bridges, resistance band glute bridges, or hip abductions until failure, then that'll be really helpful for your glute development. Likewise, if you want to grow your arms, go doing bicep curls until failure, hammer curls until failure, until your form breaks with the weight that you have, or until you can't pick up your arms anymore. That's a good thing to do every now and then, once or twice a week, for 1 to 2 exercises a week to help with that. So training to failure, again, is training until you can't do the exercise with good form anymore. And unless your goal is hypertrophy, you don't really want to do it too much, but you do generally want to be close to failure, within 1 to 5 reps in reserve for most of your training. That was a good one. And this one was a 2-part question on Instagram. It was like a cry for help. It says, the scale isn't going down no matter how many clothes sizes I drop. What am I doing wrong? And the answer is, you're probably doing nothing wrong. Because if you're dropping clothes sizes, or actually let me reframe this entirely. So your goal is to lose weight, but that's not really your goal. That's just what you're labeling your goal to be. What your actual goal is to become smaller. And a lot of times, we'll associate that a smaller number on the scale means you're a smaller person, which is a reasonable assumption to make. Definitely not. It's not like that's a crazy idea. If you're a smaller person, it's reasonable to assume that you'll weigh less. But that's not always the case. That's not always gonna be the case. Depending on your training history, depending on your experience, and depending on what you've been doing to quote unquote lose that weight, you can build muscle in that time frame, add weight to your body, and look smaller and actually be smaller, which it sounds like that's what's happening. The scale isn't going down, but you've dropped several clothes sizes, it sounds like. So that means you're getting smaller, but the scale isn't showing that. All the scale tells you is how much you weigh at that one point in time. The scale doesn't tell you how much smaller you are. The scale doesn't tell you how much fat you lost either. It doesn't tell you how much muscle you built either. All of those, create your body composition. If you lose 10 pounds of fat, but you gain 10 pounds of muscle over a 5-6 month period, you are going to be smaller. So if you lost that, let's say in your legs, if you lost 10 pounds of fat in your legs, thighs and hips, but you gain 10 pounds of muscle, you'll likely lose 5 to 10 inches across both your thighs and across your hips pretty easily. That's because a pound of muscle compared to a pound of fat is like 20% of the size, I believe. So you're going to be 20% smaller but weigh the same. And more than likely that's what's happening. I've had several clients that stay the same weight over an 8-month period, 9-month period, and their goal was to lose weight, but they dropped so many more inches, they dropped so many dress sizes, pant sizes, that kind of thing, that they were able to reach their actual goal of being smaller without actually the scale reflecting it. And obviously I get it. We are conditioned through different media outlets, different transformation photos and things like that, where we see people losing all this weight and becoming this new person. But it's not really about that in the end. What you really want is to be smaller. And if you get to the smaller person that you want to be, you look great, you feel great, you look toned, you're able to wear your favorite bikinis or your bathing suits, and you're you feel good in your jeans, you feel good in your shirts, you dropped all the clothes sizes, but the scale is up 2 pounds compared to when you started. What's the problem here? I think the problem then is your perspective on what you view as success or not successful. Because if you're doing all those things and you didn't know what your scale weight was, you'd still be pretty happy, I would imagine. Unless your goal was to get bigger, of course. But if your goal was weight loss and you got all those things, you're fitting in jeans that were 4 times smaller than 4 sizes smaller than when you started, you are looking good, you're toned, you feel good about your body, you have a lot more confidence. No matter what the scale says, you're going to be happy or successful. So the question, what am I doing wrong, is what you're doing wrong is tying your success to the scale and thinking that because the scale doesn't say a certain number, you're a failure. But that's not the case. Obviously, you're a whole different person. You look a lot better, you feel a lot better, I'm guessing too. And the scale isn't going to tell you any of those things. You have to tell yourself those things. And just because the scale doesn't reflect it doesn't mean that it diminishes the value of what you achieved. It's all, it all comes together. It comes from an understanding, once again, asking yourself, what do I really want? You associate the scale with a certain goal, but the scale doesn't always reflect that goal. You have to find a way to reflect that goal in different ways. And a more accurate way to reflect it for what you want to accomplish. And again, that is, if you're getting smaller, your clothes fit better, you're dropping clothes sizes, that's really what you want. You feel more confident, you feel healthier, your spouse loves the way you look at you now, and they're more excited to be around you. Like, that is really what you're after. You just thought that wouldn't happen until you reached a certain number on the scale. And no matter what the scale says, that's not going to happen until you let it happen. And that is going to come from a lot of different outlets. And once again, it's different for everybody. Some people are able to drop 20 pounds and because they've trained for a long period of time and they've just accumulated a lot of fat and they already have a solid base of muscle. Then dropping weight is more likely for them to get smaller. But someone that's new to the gym, someone that's obese, someone that hasn't had a formal resistance training program before, and they start doing that on their weight loss journey, on their fat loss journey, I should say, not weight loss journey, they'll likely stay similar weight for a long period of time and look like a whole different person after a few months. It's normal. It's actually ideal a lot of times, and you're happier for it. It just takes you shifting your perspective from the scale is the thing that's making me happy to you, and how you look and how you feel is what's making you happy and successful. So what are you doing wrong is looking at the scale for validation instead of all these other external factors that are pointing you toward validation and success. So that was the last question. I feel like that was a good closing question to have. So thank you everyone for listening to this podcast. Once again, if you are not following me on Instagram and you have a question from something I asked, please feel free to, I shouldn't say it like that. Please follow me on Instagram so that you're able to ask a question next time I do reach out and offer that to my followers. One last thing before we go, shout out to this podcast sponsors. This podcast episode was sponsored by Strong Coffee. It's what fueled this podcast episode because I just had a cup right before answering all these questions. You can use code StoopidFit for 15% off your next Strong Coffee order. Highly recommend getting the sample pack just to get a try of things, but my favorites are the black and the morning fix. So thank you for you guys for helping me grow the show to this point where I am able to have a sponsor, and a sponsor that I love. Very much appreciative. Looking forward to answering more of your questions next time on the show, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.